Welcome. Today we are going to take this mix and we are going to turn it into this. This arrangement is from a video or two back where you can look it up on my page. The arrangement was made for the 2-mic technique with a Audix D6 and an Audix i5 and how to blend them and how to print them out into one track and get a raw guitar tone started. So go watch that video. Very good video. Really cool guitar tone. It's the one that's on here. But I also played the drums on that, as drums are really my primary instrument. And then I also put some bass guitar on here. And I just thought it would be fun to see how far we could get this mix without going back and editing stuff or retracking the instruments, and just see how far this could go. Now, as I got to the end of the mix, I did think, wow, I could have done things a little differently in the tracking phase, but that's kind of name of the game if you're working as someone who mixes people's stuff or edits people's stuff or stuff like that. You get what you get, and you got to work with it and take it to as far as you can take it. But a lot of your mixes, the source material is really what's going to define what it sounds like in the end. So make sure when you're doing this stuff, you start out with stuff that's good, that you think is good. Because once you get to the end, you can only enhance it so much. And so that all being said, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to bypass all of the plugins. I'm going to bypass all of the sends and all the routing and turn off this. This is a routing for Guitar Verb, and I'll show you that when we get to that point. But let's see. Here's our kick drum. Let's take a listen. It's got some bleed in there. This is just a D6 inside of the microphone. It's got a little EQ on the way in for some high mids. And here's our snare. It's got a whole bunch of bleed in there. A ton of bleed from the other stuff. But I de-bled it on the way in, and I played the drums on this, so I hit the snare drum ultra hard, and I hit my cymbals relatively soft, so that it minimized the amount of bleed. Here's the bottom snare, kind of the same deal. There's stuff in there, but it's just a bottom snare sound. Let's see if we can find some toms. I did clean these toms up. It's about as much editing as I did. They still have all of the crap in them when I edited them out. Toms are just, they bleed. Let's listen. You can hear the other toms in there and stuff. But then I just, all the parts where they would just be sitting there rumbling and stuff. I got all that stuff out of there. That's about as much editing as I'll do on some toms. I don't really get too crazy with that. Usually, because like I said, the drummer should be monitoring that some stuff himself. Let's listen to our overheads. I did a spaced pair. And when I do a spaced pair, I put from drummer's perspective, the left condenser mic, I usually put that directly over the snare. Then the other one, I don't care where that is. I just make whatever the height is from the snare to the first overhead that's above the snare. I make it the same distance to that overhead. And that way when I hit my snare and my other instruments, that snare drum's in phase. But I love having a ton of snare, and I always get a lot of bass drum from that too. I love having a lot of bass drum and a lot of toms and a lot of snare in my overheads. It makes them way more usable, and when I compress them, I get a sweet ass sound out of them that I love. I don't use overheads as cymbal mics. Cymbals get into fucking everything. And you do not need to be micing that shit, in my opinion. Now, if you have a soft hitting drummer, or they have a bunch of little teeny splashes and stuff, then that negates what I just said, because those little things can get lost, and if you're trying to bring them out in a mix in the end, then I would spot mic splashes, chinas. If someone is using the bell a lot, you might want to mic the bell on it. If they're doing hi-hat work in the middle of songs, you might want to mic the hi-hat. But this arrangement is not heavy on that sort of articulation. It's very just hitting the drums, nothing really going on there. So there's that. Here's our guitars from that other video. It's a Mesa Boogie Rectoverb with a D6 on the cone and an I5 on the outside of the cone, summed into one track and blended. Both of them are recorded the same way, but they are two different performances. And then our bass was just direct in bass with a Dingwall. I can't remember what type of Dingwall it is, but it's like a Dingwall extended scale bass. It's really awesome bass. I borrowed it from my friend Jack Thompson, who is in City of Industry. Go listen to City of Industry. Alright, so anyways, that's what we got. There's our raw tracks. Now the first thing that I do when I start to look at a mix is, for me, I want the snare drum to be king. I want it to be how I stage everything else around the mix, because it's a really important thing in metal. I mix it with the vocals. It's almost up with the vocals, just about. We don't have any vocals in this, but you'll get the point. Kick drum is next, and then I kind of bring everything else up around those two transients. So let's start with our raw snare sound, and we'll look at this routing. I have everything routed to buses except for my kick drum. Well, that's not true because they're all going to one bus. So the drums, all of the buses, let's see, tom bus, snare bus, and the kick, which are all of them, and the overheads are going to drums over here, drum bus, and that is going to inside, and that is going to our master fader, and then I have sends going to the outside, which we're going to get into. Don't worry about that at the moment. Now, our top snare has a bunch of bleed in it, and if you don't know how to gate that stuff out without getting snip noises and crap on there, the first thing you can do is, like I said in the first place, try to get your drummer to hit the snare harder, rim shot it, whatever, use bigger sticks, and get them to not hit the cymbals so hard. You know, maybe make them practice that way for a while, but if you're working with something you have no control over it, this is how you do it. FabFilter makes a Pro. It's a multi-band compressor, and for what we're doing here, we only want to compress down to, let's see, about 5K. This is where all the cymbal noise and the harsh stuff will come out and create this whirlwind of phasiness when you bring the snare drum up. And what's going on here essentially is we're bringing the initial volume of that down a lot. Like, let's see here. If I can get this out of the way. Let's see. You know, minus 12, you know, further than minus 12 decibels of reduction to start with. Then I have it on expand, and the ratio is 4:1. The attack's really fast, the release is really fast, because I just want it to bring up the snare really quick, and I don't want it to be like king and all the cymbals stay in there for a while. I just want it to go pop, 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 just open up just for the brightness of the snare, and close it back up so I don't have to hear those cymbals again. Now, when you get into here, you're going to have to do some adjustment. It's pretty forgiving though. Threshold is obvious. When this guy comes out, we're telling it when it should open, at what decibel level it should open. So these settings you'll have to mess with differently on each snare, but this is how I get rid of some of the bleed. That's without it. You can hear the bell and all that scrap in there. Now it's gone almost, you know. We'll start working with that. Secondly, I use this Chris Lord-Alge plugin for a lot of drums, but I use it on snare a lot. It's a sweet plugin. It's got a gate on it, which you can use if you don't have another gate that you like. It works fine, but I like using my gate technique. I got that from a different place. It's not something I invented, but then it's got a really nice reverb on it. It's got a really nice compressor on it, and the high end and low end controls on it are really just, I'm not exactly sure what the curve is on them, but you know, it works great. So let's unbypass it and see what it's doing. Yeah. And for the moment, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unbypass my mastering chain. I use Ozone 9. I've been using it since it just got released, and my mastering chain on here basically just has a threshold being held at something like you would use for like a Spotify master, you know, 13 LUFS. And I have some imaging. We'll turn the imaging off and the end up dynamics, all that stuff on there that I went through at the end, and balancing. We'll just leave the maximizer on. That way we can hear what the transients sound like when they're at their correct loudness. So here we go. So this is adding a little compression. Very subtle, but it's doing a lot for me actually. I like it. Now our bottom snare, I did the same thing. You know, if you want to copy these settings right now, pause the screen, copy these settings on your multi-band compressor, and then start moving it from there. Use Steven Slate's virtual mix rack for a ton of stuff. And this is no exception. If you've seen me mix a snare before, this is pretty common for me. Most drums get the same setup. There is a really aggressive EQ, something to finish that EQ with, a compressor, another soft finishing like mastering EQ, and then a trimmer just in case it's clipping. I don't want it to clip into my master chain. So let's listen to what this is doing. Boosting a little 5K, just a teeny bit, and a little bit of 110. And then this guy, you can hear that, brighten it up quite a bit. and that's some 12K, boosting about 4.5 of that, 4.5 some 4K, and nothing else going on there. And the compressor, just kind of adding some length to the transient and allowing it to kind of, you know, I love the sound the bottom snare is doing that. Then Revival is just kind of a high-end, low-end EQ, really broad. I'm not sure exactly what's going on under the hood with this thing, but you know, it sounds great. You can hear it just adds this really sweet high end. So as far as the reason why you'd bust these out is because now you want to balance your bottom and top snare mics. Still a bunch of bleed in there, but you know what I mean? Like, don't worry about that. We're going to learn how to deal with that. So I like to finish both of them off afterwards with this Pro C2 compressor, and you can hear it just kind of adds that compressed sound that we all know as a compressed snare drum. Kind of gives it like a whoosh noise, and I'm always like, when I start working with this, let's just start from scratch. Okay, I would start somewhere with the attack. I would say like 33% on any compressor that I'm doing this with for bus compression. And my release, you know, a little after that, and you can adjust those. No perfect amount. I would say that if you're gonna compress something, anything past 4:1 is way too aggressive of a ratio. So it's actually just going to act like a limiter, and it's not going to let everything fall up like it's supposed to. It's going to start limiting the crap out of it. So 4:1 for compression. After that, you're limiting. Just something to keep in mind. I don't mess with the hold on this. I leave the gain on auto. And like I said, the threshold, what I'm looking for here is by ear, somewhere around there. I don't know what that is for each situation, but without it, just some pokiness. I just kind of want to soften up that pokiness a little bit. There you go, man. Maybe a little less. There we go. What is that? See, it's around 8. You'll be able to hear it with your own ears. 8 or 9, somewhere in there. Okay. And then to finish it all off, I use this virtual tape machine, and it's clipping a little bit. Don't want that. But it adds a little bit of sweet low end. And these tape machines, they're kind of compressors. All of these emulations of tape machines, they're just kind of compressing a bunch of the frequencies. So it does it in a nice way. I have it on 15 inches per second on the FG9 setting. 1.5 inch 2-track. And that's like a mastering. You can mess with these though. 16 track would be more if you were like tracking instruments. There is a difference. And then the bias is in the middle. I don't have it on low or high. These little VU meters, it's actually probably reducing a lot, honestly, or messing with it a lot. We can't tell. These old meters, if you've never seen an old actual console with knobs and stuff on it, they move really slow. And a lot of times you're just using your ears anyways, It'll tell you when it's clipping, but it's not as exact as a digital meter. So I can hear it doing a lot. So I like that. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to our kick drum. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not going to add a sub or any kind of samples to it because the purpose of this mix is to make you work with real stuff. Maybe one of these mixes I will go ahead and sample the crap out of everything and make it sound really crazy modern. If someone was asking me to do that for their mix and they wanted it to sound more modern, then we would grab samples right now and I would start working with them. I have no problem working with samples. I'm not ashamed of using samples. That is a preference. I just think that if you're going to use samples, you should learn how to work with stuff that doesn't have samples on it first. It's going to make your use of samples a lot better. So there's our bass drum. And what I did here is I cleaned up the low end, this rumbly stuff here. I enhanced the low end by getting rid of some of the high, low, low, mid. And I found a click noise. And I just kind of cleaned up the ends. So 35 megahertz and down to 500 hertz here. So 35 hertz, 16,000 hertz here. And that just kind of gets rid of all the super high end, super low end that might get into my master. So let's, I'll just kind of show you how I get there. And let's just clear this. So that's without anything going on. Now the first thing I would do, like I said, would be clear this, and I'm just gonna hit that. And these aren't an ear thing. A lot of the stuff people can't hear. Some people can hear above 16.5, not very many people, especially older people. It gets down around 14, 13, stuff like that. So you don't have to sit there and adjust that by ear. It's not important. It's just cutting off this crap because no one can hear it and it's not usable and it adds energy into our mastering chain when we want to go master. And you should probably do that to all of your high energy instruments like bass, snare drum, if you have a snare drum that's low or you're doing something crazy with it, toms, stuff like that. So let's listen to some more of our kick drum here. Just get a spot that's got a bunch of it. And like I said, pretty much every kick drum sound I've ever got has a bunch of this. Hear how that's not pleasing and it's kind of woofing our speakers? I don't like that. Plus, it's not really usable anyways. It doesn't add anything good. And you're going to find as you mix that 300 to 400 is kind of like that. I don't know why exactly. Then we want to find where our high end is. I like it somewhere up here. If you have other instruments in your mix that have a lot of this high end going on, you might have to search for a different spot so they're not masking each other. But I like that. It's a nice soft sound. Now, bass drums are kind of a rumbly little bitch. And we can see here's a resonant tone. We want to get rid of that stuff. Not completely. We want to control that rumble. On this FabFilter EQ, you can static gain and you can get a little compressor. It'll just compress it as it's going. I love this thing. And then listen for another, resonant tone up here. That seems about right. But yeah, don't go crazy with that. Now let's listen to our bypassed. Kind of plop, 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 plop. Smooth and nice. And we can come back and adjust this, but that's about all I'll do to kick drum and EQ wise, and then a little bit of this to add some of that low end back in, but it's a nice clean low end. There's that. Alright, so let's listen to our toms. Let's grab a spot here where they're all going. Again, some EQ going on here. It's a lot like EQing a bass drum, but toms have a fundamental tone, and you're going to want to find that. So let's go ahead and we'll factory default this back to nothing. You can see it in this. I love the spectrum analyzer in this EQ, but if you couldn't, you would kind of move this in until it started to go away, and that's a good way to find out where you're actually getting rid of something you need. But let's go ahead, and since we can't see it, there it is. And the first thing I would do, start listening for a spot you don't like that. This is just a muddy spot. Nice. And then in every one of these kind of toms, bongos, any kind of stuff you ever put into a mix, or the person you're recording puts into a mix, they always have this like bong kind of noise that I remember hearing from like Mario Brothers when I was a kid, and it needs to be there, but you don't want it to be like crazy, and we want to control it a little bit. So it's like somewhere in there. All right, let's add some high end. I like that. See how much more poo-poo that sounds? Let's put our EQ back on. Nice. And they just always need to be EQ'd, man. See, it's pretty much where I was before. And just that kind of shows you right there. It's not an exact thing. Use your ears. Every day is going to be a little different. You're never going to be the same twice. Same with this guy. Pretty much the same, right? Just gives it some depth. It makes it sound very nice, and it'll mix in a lot better that way. And our floor tom. They're a little different when you're looking for stuff, but just use your ears. Somewhere around 400, you're going to want to scoop out. Somewhere around your mid phone noise after that, you're also going to scoop out, but not as much, and you're going to want to add some high end to it. And you're going to want to, for a floor tom, I wouldn't go as crazy with the high pass filter, that's for sure. I would keep it somewhere around 35 like you did for your kick drum. So that already sounds pretty good, man. I mean, honestly. And to finish off our toms, before we go forward, I use the Chris Lord Algae again. We don't want to use any of the gate, because we already gated it. We don't want double gating. And as far as reverb goes, I mean, adding some reverb to your toms can give us some cool depth. I wouldn't go crazy on the solo, single drums though. I'll show you a good way to add reverb to the whole thing without having to get muddy here, but a little bit will help mix it in. So just add a little bit right now and then come back to it later and adjust that. You're going to want to compress them a little bit. That adds a niceness to it. I don't want bite in my toms, I want top end. So. do want some low end. See, that's without. Let's see where I got before. Oh, they're a little different. Almost like the one I have right now, better though. So we'll leave it there. Like I said, you can always come back to this stuff, man. Just kind of get it soloed out. I probably did all those other adjustments after I was already way far into the mix and I came back and adjusted it. So now that I say that, let's go back. I'll leave it. Alright, so here's our overheads. Let's hear it a little bit. Now for overheads, the things you're going to encounter with it is there's low end in there. It doesn't need to be there. If you got a lot of snare drum in there, you want to use that as kind of your overall snare drum sound. It's going to affect the way your snare drum and your toms, at least the way I told you to do it in this video, it's going to affect your toms and your snare a lot. So you need to take great care to not over EQ your overheads. Super important that when you got the overheads in the first place, that you spent time to make sure that they were, for one, in phase. As we can hear, these ones are in good phase. The cymbals are shimmering on their own and doing what they're supposed to do on their own. And they're far enough away to where they're not humming with the cymbals and adding weirdness, and they're close enough to where they're getting all of the attack. So I spend a lot of time with overheads adjusting them. So. But once you have something good in the beginning, let's do the AV thing again. So if we were gonna start, the first thing I would do is I would get rid of some of the low end that doesn't need to be there. All this stuff here you can kind of see. Just listen. Like 100. But there definitely is some hissiness in there. I mean, that doesn't bother me that much. Maybe a teeny bit we'll take out. Kind of a cuppy noise. I wouldn't go crazy with that. Couple dB. Again, you know, 400, like I said, at 300 to 400, somewhere in there, you're probably going to find some poopy stuff you don't want. I don't know. Grab a little bit of that. Don't go crazy. You know, I can see right here, I can hear it with my ear. So there's a lot of this hissy 7K in here. This stuff around it is, I like. 7K in general is kind of it's this noise. But you still need it in there, so don't just go clamping down on this stuff, man. You know, don't give it the clamps. Alright, and I hear some other hissiness in here, probably somewhere around here. Yeah, there it is. See? That's the kind of hissiness that's like, ugh. Get rid of some of it. It still needs to be in there, but not as much. And that's what EQ is. It's gain choicing. How much gain each frequency you want to have, not getting rid of some and leaving some in all the time. A lot of it is just getting it balanced. Because, you know, it still needs to be there, just not as crazy. It's just like when you have a lot of guitars and a lot of drums, and, you know, just think of this as like its own little faders and stuff like that. Each one of these frequencies is a sound that's being made by the instrument you have gathered, you know, you've recorded. And a lot of it still needs to be in there. You just don't want it the guitars to be louder than the drums to the point where you can't hear the drums. And you don't want the drums to be louder than the guitars to the point where you can't hear the guitars. It's all a balancing act. It's all taste. So play around with stuff. Don't go too crazy with it. I like to remove a little bit of mids. Just a little bit. And I like to clean the high end a little bit on this because it's a little too much of the super high highs. And I don't want it off all the time, so let's add that little compressor to it. Alright, I think that sounds pretty good. I wonder how close we got to our other one. I boosted something here. A little snare drum. I like this one better. Alright, let's leave that. Now, our overheads, like I was saying before, if you have a lot of the drums in there, you can put a bus compressor on it, and man, it really will change the way the whole drum set sounds. So let's take a listen. I'll just start from nothing again. So with something like this, I want it to be fast. I don't want it to be hanging on to the transients for too long. So a faster release is good, and a fast attack is good. So it opens up right away. And then we'll just start adding some of it in there, 4:1 ratio. We don't want to be reactive to our low instruments, so anything below 150, if you put this on there, it won't react to it. On these old emulations of this stuff, when there was a high pass filter, it would just EQ it on its way in, but allow it to go through, but keep it like a splitter, one side of it into that compressor, one side of it not. And so that's what this is doing. It's allowing that bass drum to come in and then go through the other side without getting into this compressor. Now we can see our gain reduction is pretty high right now. I don't want it to be that bad. Let's hear what it is without it. Need to adjust the gain on it too. Dude, it's just sounds great. And overall, you can look at these. I made this preset. I modeled it after some drums that I did at a place called Uber Beats here in Everett, and I got some room mics, some Royers that I was using there, and I really loved the space that it made in there, and it made this great reverb, and I was like, oh shit. I back-to-backed it, and then I copied it in here, and this is what I come up with. And I moved the decay around, from time to time, but this is as close as I could get it to sound like that room sounded. So I recorded this in my bedroom, so this is my way of getting it to have some space. So let's listen to it. That's without. I love that. And okay, there you go. There's your drums. The only last thing we want to do is I sent everything to this drum bus, and we're going to want to compress all of that together. It will bring the drums together, It'll bring the close mics and the room mics and your overheads all together if you're doing lots of mics, and it will make everything glue together and give it a really sweet ass fucking sound. So let's give it a listen. Let's take all this stuff off. I have the high pass. I have the high pass up again because I don't want this thing reacting to the kick drum at all. And so I'm just gonna, again, I want a fast attack, I want a fast release, and I'm gonna have it at a ratio of 4:1. And let's just start adding, you know, taking that threshold up and seeing, or rather down, to what it's, you know, going to react to. And we'll see this guy move, and I'm looking for about 3 to 5 decibels for when the snare hits, and about 1 to when the kick hits. But don't ever use your eyes. Start listening. You don't want it to be sucking everything else out, but you want it to sound like it's all gluing together. So let's take a listen. From nothing. When you're doing this, always it'll reduce the overall volume, and they all come with little makeup gain. Most compressors do. So. All right, and the whole time I have all these buses going to a bus here I'm calling the inside. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But we're going to want to know what that sounds like when we start adding stuff in. So this is another compressor from Steven Slate, but it's a sweet compressor. My God, for big bus stuff like this, where you're adding lots of multiple instruments into it, like an instrument bus or something, however you do your stuff, try this thing out, man. If you haven't already, it's great. It's got drive on it. The drive is really pleasing. It's got a really just usable, simple, it's like a mastering compressor. So let's take everything down again so you can just hear how this all works from in to out. I am going to leave this so it doesn't react to the low end as usual, and we're going to put the makeup gain back to where it was. So it's starting from nothing. Let's put the ratio at 4:1. I'm going to do fast attack, fast release. Start adding this in. God, I love this thing. When you're doing big buses like this, be careful that you're not allowing too much gain reduction. You're going to notice it when you get to the end anyways, so just try to keep it lower. And if you need to add little bits more, it's easier to go up than to start reducing tons of stuff at the end. So, all right, so our guitars, let's go ahead and listen to them. And those are going into a guitar bus. That guitar bus is going into our inside again, remember, with our compressor that we already set up. So that guitar bus has a couple of things on it we're going to go through. First thing you should do is try to clean this thing up. Now, you can see I don't really go too crazy with the reduction on this stuff. It's all like compressor stuff. Let's listen to it though, with how I set it up. some of the super high fizziness. This might be able to come up a little bit actually. See all that hissy, like high-end noise? That will kill you when you go to mix. Clean that stuff up. So let's go ahead, like we have been doing, and we're gonna start from scratch. So I'm gonna get rid of about that same low end. I'm gonna get rid of the same high end because you can't even hear it. And it's stupid. I don't need it in there. Or rather, so we'll do it a different way. First thing I'm gonna do is a little muddy. I can tell that there's some rumble here. It's a bad noise. We don't want that. It already does a lot. So then there's also probably some inarticulate noise. So I'll listen to a little solo. This is all just crappy noise that we don't want. And more than getting rid of the noises, it just kind of helps the other noises shine through. Next thing about distorted guitars is I'd say the range somewhere between like 25 to like 5. You're gonna have a lot of this like just terrible chirpy stuff. But again, like our overheads, you want it in there. So find a couple that are really bad, or that you feel are really poking out. That'll help some of this other good stuff. But don't do too much. And the high end is a little much for me. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. So the 6500 range is probably good. See, really cleaned up the high end. I love this stuff in here, so I'm going to just boost a little bit. It's just more aggressive now. I like my new one better. So let's copy that over. Pan them. That all that noise on top. In the end, when you're mixing all this, all that high end is going to make this like a chaotic high end fight to the death for all of the instruments. So get that under control for each one of these guys, but don't get too crazy with it, like I said. So cool. Now our guitar bus, you can even hear with your ears. When you palm mute, you create more energy than when the notes are open. We need to control that a little bit. So fast attack, 4:1 ratio. We want to compress, we don't want to limit this. And if you do want to limit it, then and experiment with that. I'm not looking for a ton of reduction. I just want it to get rid of the, when it starts rumbling and stuff around anything above our high pass filter here. See? Not making a huge difference, but it should engage. See it, just reducing it a little bit so it just kind of makes some evenness. And it gives it like a nice silky tone. So then in here, I don't remember what I used this for. Oh, there's a stereo enhancer. And I did grab some EQ for the bus. Got rid of some mud. Enhanced some of this sweet noise here. And just kind of and then our imaging helped widen out just the high end on this. More of a mastering thing though, so. But if you don't have this, it's not going to make that big of a difference. But yeah, Ozone 9, sweet, great deal. So then, when we get into the mix, a trick I like to use to give depth to the guitars and add width is to add a little reverb and then swap the pans on it. So I have it. These two guitars are going into guitars here. And then it's going into, hang on. We're going to make guitar verb. And we're going to send some of this there. So let's do guitar verb. And see what it sounds like. But there's a gnarly compressor that's compressing it a lot. I chopped off the lows and the highs a lot because I don't want them getting into the reverb because it's going to cause a lot of chaos. And then we have our small drum room, which is, like I said, I love this. So let's just turn these all on. And then I have the left and rights switched so that they're not phasing on each other. There's with it. There's without. Pepper to taste. That's too much. That's not enough. And that's gonna change when we put it into the mix. So we're just gonna spend a teeny bit of time on bass here. And I use the Slate over loud here. Let's zoom all the way out. That's in. Let's go all the way out. It's got an equalizer, a little distortion pedal, an old Fender tube head. Looks like a 212 cab or something. I don't know exactly what this is supposed to be. And then this guy. Let's put it into this. It's a chorus, I think. Or no, it's another EQ, a parametric EQ. And basically, I just went through here and I picked out the stuff I liked out of the bass. That's without anything. Let's turn it on. See, I sucked some 200 out here. Added some of this mids. It's doing a lot. And then there's that distortion pedal. Not really much going on here. Everything's pretty 12 o'clock. And the EQ the same way. It's not crazy. I reduced a little bit on the front and have a little a low pass for one side of it, and I haven't peaked on one side. That's kind of giving it a little bit of extra compression so that it balances out the tone of it a little bit. Then I sucked out some of the rumble. You know, some of this crap that happens. Not a lot. And some mud. And added some spank. Then there's a whole nother video that takes forever to explain. But I have a sidechain compressor that is keyed to my kick drum. Shut up. And one that's keyed to my snare drum. And it reduces, when that kick drum hits, it turns down my bass for the time the kick drum is on and for the time the snare drum's on a little bit, so they don't fight with each other and the kick drum and the snare drum get to come out for that second that it's going on, and it doesn't suck all the energy out of the master for the time that that thing is going on and make it sound really weird and poo and pee, fart and shid. We don't want our compressors, we don't want to hear them reacting to kick drums and hear them reacting to snare drums. We want them to be loud though, so this is a way to do it. So go back and watch that video and then come back. So here it is. So there's that. All right, those all sound pretty cool, man. But if I start turning up my drums, they're going to start taking over because they're big, fatty sounds. So in my insides, I have... Let's turn this down. Look at that. Do something more weird. All right, so I should have been checking that more. But yeah, if I turn up those drums, they're going to start stomping all over my guitars every time that kick drum comes in. And every time the snare drum comes in, it's going to stomp all over my guitar. So I need to find a way to get them to go to their own lane. And one way to do that is to have multiple buses before your master, and I am going to call those inside and outside. I didn't make this up. A lot of people do this, so I'm not going to claim credit to it. But at the moment, I have everything going inside. Now I'm going to choose which one of my big heavy-ass transients I want to not be in that compressor, destroying it. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what happens when I turn this stuff up. So, say I didn't know how to do this, and I was going to start, oh, my drums aren't loud. So now I need to get them loud. Here's what's going to happen, all right? Let's watch our compressor. Turn up the snare drum. It's funny. It's not that bad. It is kind of getting in the way, though. is kind of muddy. Even if we could get him loud in there. It's like I've already done a pretty good job of controlling everything. My bad. But we want them to be clear and distinct in driving. And we're not going to do it, obviously, even turning those all the way up. We're going to start adding some into our outside. So let's take a look at what that, or take a listen to what that sounds like. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to add it in. And you're going to hear how defined the bass drum gets when we don't have it turning up inside of that blanket of compressor that's over the rest of this stuff. I'm just going to leave it low so it's in there, but it's not killing everything. So let's bring this up. Ooh, see, dude, since it's not under the control of that compression anymore, and it's not in there making those things react to it and fighting with it, it's in its own lane, it's going to be clear, and it's going to make it a whole difference. So out, whip. It's not stomping on all the other shit either. It's there kicking ass in its own fucking place, and that's what we want it to do. Too much. Alright, and the snare inside the compressor is also making the inside bus probably react too much. I don't know that, but I'm kind of hearing that. Let's add some of that snare drum into our outsides until we get a nice big fatty ass snare sound going on. Same with our toms. Right now they're there, but they're not like defined the way that I want them to be. And this is gonna do that for us. So I mean, they're there, but they're so cranked here too, so it's funny. So let's add those in. Reverb on the guitar now. Let's add some guitars into the outsides. Thing is when you go and you mute the insides, you can only hear the outsides, and you'll hear like it sounds like it's making this. It's like it's so loud, but listen, it's not. No one's messing with the guitar. It sounded like I was adding like tons of guitar, but that little bit of guitar and adding all of these layers makes a huge difference, even though it's barely there. A little bit of our bass guitar. Alright, let's get a spot where we can listen to this here. I'm gonna start turning some of this stuff back on. that's all real instruments. There's no fake, MIDI stuff in here. And there's no drum samples. But we could make this thing extremely modern and even more insane sounding if we added drum samples and we layered those guitars with some synthesizers. I could get in here and do that, layer some of the bass. I could auto tune the bass so that it's like straight as an arrow, which does a lot for everything. We could automate all of the volume in our snare hits and our tom hits and everything, and replace the toms and blend them. And I mean, we could do so much to this to make it, to get it even more crazy. It just depends on your client. It depends on the person you're working for. Where do they want to go? I personally, for my own music, I'm not playing technical death metal, and I'm also not Bruno Mars, I'm somewhere in a space where I think having natural sounding drums and natural sounding stuff, it works for what I do, and I play all these instruments, and I spent a lot of time doing it, so there's a little bit of pride in there for me. But you need to listen to your client and listen to what they want, and you need to know how to use drum samples. You need to know how to do all that stuff. And you also need to know how to do this, because what happens when you get something and you can't fix it with drum samples, you can't fix it with that stuff, or you don't know how to work with that stuff? You're limiting yourself by not expanding your horizon. So let's listen to this again. I'm going to bypass all of the plugins and all of the sends, and then we'll bring them back in. That's unbelievable, huh? Listen to without anything. That's crazy. Let's put it back in. Snare's a little bit loud. It needs some balancing, but you can hear, how you can get. Obviously, I mean, those kick drums and snare drums is so loud, but you don't hear it stomping on the other stuff. So this gives you a little bit of freedom to really explore your tastes and how you want to sound. And like I said, go look up the side compression thing, because that is going to change your life if you haven't already watched that. And maybe I'll do, a couple more videos, but, this one explains that inside-outside mixing, and it's a great technique, and I learned it from somebody, and I'm passing it along to you. It changed my life. I never could get things as clear and loud as I want them to get until I figured that out, but if you have questions about how it was done, leave them in the comments and ask me. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about this stuff. All right. Go have fun. Go mix. Test your sources. Experiment. Don't limit yourself. Keep your mind open. I love you, and I will see you later.